Hey everyone, Dr. Crayhay here. In this video I'm going to discuss Chapter 6. More specifically, I'll be talking about the construct validity of surveys and polls. In this section we're talking about surveys and polls. A survey is typically used when people are asked about some kind of consumer product. A poll, on the other hand, is when we ask people maybe about their political or social opinions. So they do have a distinction, but in our textbook and in this course in general, we'll use survey and poll interchangeably. It's basically when we're asking people about something. One essential part of a survey and a poll is the question wording. So let's discuss that next. So there are a number of things to consider as you are constructing a survey or a poll, or even looking at results from a survey and a poll. One is choosing question formats. So here we have a couple of example question formats. The rating scales, so like the 0 to 5 stars that you see on Amazon and those kinds of things. That's a type of question format, forced response there. You also have one from the University of Delaware pictured. I'll talk about that more in depth in just a second. You have to think about writing well-worded questions. The way you phrase your question can influence responding, so there are a number of things to consider there. And then how do we encourage accurate responses? How do we know that people aren't just saying yes to everything or being neutral to everything or Christmas treeing our surveys? So we'll consider those in the subsequent slides. So when choosing a question type for a survey, you have several different options. One is an open-ended question. So this is something where you respond with text. So how do you feel about the presidential candidates? Would be one example. I might ask you to describe your weekend activities. So this yields qualitative data. It's just a fancy word for words. So it's going to be a different kind of analysis, but it is very useful, very rich data. You also have forced choice format, so it's basically like a multiple choice question where you're forced to choose one out of several options. One example of that is a Likert scale. There were quite a few Likert scales in our class survey. If you've been watching these lectures, I've asked you at the end of each one to basically rate the degree to which you agree with the statement. This lecture has helped me understand chapter, and then whatever chapter it is, on a scale of 1 to 5. Strongly disagree to strongly agree. So that's your typical Likert scale. You might have a semantic differential format, which is shown here. So you can rate how easy a course was, for example. You can rate usefulness, you can rate clarity, and then you have options 1 to 5 there. So question format, you have several different options. Each has their merits and then of course their weaknesses. If you want really rich data, you'll probably go with open-ended questions. But then again, it will be qualitative analyses, which are a little bit more complicated. Forced choice formats lend themselves easily to numeric data, which will lead you to statistical analysis, which in my opinion is actually a little bit easier. So you have to consider how your question is worded for a couple of different reasons. One being leading questions. The way you write your question can cause someone to respond in a certain way. So your textbook talks about an excellent example of this, and I'll mention a study done by Elizabeth Loftus. So she had participants look at slides of a car accident. So you see it before, you see it after, but of course there was no video, so you don't have that objective data. One group of participants, she asked, how fast were the cars going when they bumped into each other? Another group was asked, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? So you can see bumped versus smashed, they imply very different things, and the respondents did give miles per hour that accommodated that. Bumped group was much lower, smashed was much higher because of what those words imply. So you have to be careful with leading questions. We also have double-barreled questions. So this is essentially when you ask two questions in one. So do you like fish sandwiches and cheeseburgers? or fish sandwiches or cheeseburgers would be a better example. So if they say yes to that, you don't know which one of those two they were responding to, so you don't really have any data there. In fact, when I come across double-barreled questions in my statistical consulting, I tend to throw them out because you really don't know what the respondent was trying to tell you. Some people use negative wording. We'll talk about some ways that people deceive on surveys, and so negative wording is a way to keep people from answering yes to everything. So for example, you have a questionnaire on happiness. All of them are talking about how happy you are, how satisfied with life you are, but one of them is the exact opposite. So it'll say something like, I'm extremely dissatisfied with life. Same scale and everything, but you can see if someone is answering strongly agree to how happy they are, but they also answer strongly agree to how dissatisfied they are, you know that someone is probably misleading you, not paying attention to your survey. So that's why negative wording is used occasionally. Statistically, it's not the best. It tends to mess up a couple of different metrics for you, but it's pretty popular in survey construction. You also have to consider question order, sorry. So even the order that you ask questions can influence people. Say, for example, I begin my survey with questions about race, ethnicity, gender, age. What happens is you're priming those components of the self. So you kind of bring to your mind that you are a female and your age and all of those kinds of things, and that's going to influence the way that you respond to the rest of the survey. Some cognitive examples again, if you prime people with their gender and then you tell people, females do worse on these kinds of tests, guess what? Females will then do worse. If you had not asked them gender up front, you didn't tell them that females would do worse, level playing field there. So don't ask any kind of demographic information up front because that can influence how people respond. One way to get around this is to put questions in blocks. So you kind of group sets of questions, and then you can randomize the order that those questions are presented. So that's one way to deal with that problem. How can we ensure that people are giving us accurate responses? There's no way to absolutely guarantee that people will be open and honest with you, but there are a couple of things that you can do. First and foremost, make it easy for people. Don't make them jump through hoops just to give you answers. For example, just embed the question right into the lecture. So that's one way that I'm trying to make it very easy for you guys in this class to provide feedback. Do the same thing in your surveys, just place them in an easy place online. Make them easy to get to, easy to interact with. Some people will use shortcuts as they're going through your survey, and it's really unfortunate when you're trying to publish scientific articles to come across these kinds of things. One is kind of yay saying, so people will just respond strongly agree to everything. Another is fence sitting, so they might go through and answer neutral to everything. There are things you can do for these. So for the yay saying, you could put in those negatively worded items like I mentioned. For fence sitting, you can just not provide a neutral option. So those are a couple of things to think about. Some people will respond in socially desirable ways, so they'll try to look good. One way to counteract this, probably the best way to counteract this, is to make the survey anonymous. Don't ask for their name, don't ask for email, just put it up online or hand it out, in person, and then leave and say, turn this in to a certain office or just fill it out online. I'm going to leave you alone. I don't know who you are. I'll never contact you again. That will reduce the social desirability responding. We also, as we're filling out surveys, we have a tendency to say more than we could possibly know. So your textbook talks about an excellent study where they had people rate how much they liked different kinds of pantyhose. So I won't ruin it for you, but please do read that part in your textbook. It's really interesting and pretty clever how they worked that out. But we want to have knowledge of our motivations, of why things happen, and so if we don't have one readily available, we'll come up with one. It might be based on our past experience, on our current mood at the time, but we will come up with something. So you have to be careful not to give people the opportunity to kind of make things up on the spot there. Now, reporting memories of events. So this is something that I deal with in my research. People reporting something that happened a year ago, 2 years ago, and so you can assess the accuracy of these occasionally. So one thing that you could do is to get reports from family members and then see how well they line up. You could check news events. You could check any kind of publicly available data to try to verify what folks are saying. And so that's what I'll tend to do when I ask people about what the weather was like during some kind of event. So I can go back to the weather report and find that. But reporting things in a person's past, it isn't crystal clear. So people often think that memory is like a photograph, particularly these really vivid memories that I study. They think it's like a photograph just ingrained in their brain. That's actually not the case at all. And so anytime you're dealing with memories in a study, they will be slightly distorted. They'll be misremembered. So that's something that you have to be aware of as you are collecting data or reading studies that rely on what's called retrospective reports of memory.